Hello, my name is Jonathan Forster, and welcome to the Multi-Story Thinking podcast on interior design. I'm an interior designer and educator. My job is to improve quality of life and productivity by helping people to create beautiful and practical spaces to live and work in. The Multi-Story Thinking podcast takes an educational slant to the interior design world. If, like me, you are curious about how things are done within the industry, want to know how people got their breaks and how they've developed their careers, and get some top tips and advice, then this is the podcast for you. So sit back, relax, as we help unravel the mysteries of interior design. Gus Zogolovitch is a property developer and founder of Unboxed Homes, whose aim is to help people build their own homes and to find ways to make it easier. Gus is on a mission to change new builds in the UK. His aim is to build homes to be great quality, brilliantly designed, tailored to a customer's needs, and most importantly, they should represent good value for money. Their Blenheim Grove development in Peckham, South London, has won the BuildIt award for Best Custom Build Project, the Silver Award for London Design Awards 2021, as well as made the shortlist for the Telegraph's Home of the Year 2021. In this episode, we discover the approaches to creating better quality housing, why we should change the way we calculate the value of property, how building a shell encourages customization and individuality and gives clients the opportunity to be creative, and why, if you want a lavender and sea salt home, you have to build it yourself. Really interested because I think Karen put us in touch, which is nice.
Yes,
that sort of just the sort of power of the old networks, bringing people together. But when I saw your work, I was really excited by it. Partly because I know the Blenheim Grove area because I used to live in East Dulwich, so there's a kind of local kind of thing. So it's good to see some of that going on there. But also, what you're doing seems to be a totally different way of approaching building and customization, which sounds fascinating. And just as a bit of a background, I've just moved out last year of a new build property where we basically bought the show home, and you just think, oh, this is so fantastic, but actually when you get into it, it just wasn't right, and I guess that's what you're trying to overcome a little bit, isn't it, in the process. But if you could just give us a bit of background and what Unboxed Homes is, what they do, and why it came to fruition, that'd be really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I'm a bit of a kind of greenie at heart, and I kind of think, I've been like that, ever since I was quite young, sort of teenage years, and one of the things that struck me about housing is there's so much waste involved in things that often when new builds are built, they're not particularly nicely designed. They are often built on a kind of as cheaply as possible, and I think as I started to sort of delve into this arena, two things happened. First of all, I ended up buying a plot of land and building my own home. And second of all, I kind of got into development as well. I was sort of doing the two at the same time. And that was initially I was doing nicely designed, design-led new build development. And I realized, and at the time I was trying to sell, or if you like, upsell green kind of technology. Should we put some solar panels on? Should we put all this sort of stuff? And no one was biting. And I think it led me to the conclusion that in this country we have a problem because a developer's incentives are to cut costs at all possible junctions. Because if you think about it, once they have bought the land, that's effectively a fixed cost. The next thing they can do is sell the home, and generally in an area there's a kind of glass ceiling. There's only so much a home can sell for. And that's not necessarily because consumers don't want to pay more. It's because banks won't lend them the money to buy more because banks are built on a comparison basis of valuation, not a individual valuation. So what I mean by that is if you look at the way you buy a car, you apply for finance and it's about what you can afford. They don't say, well, that Mercedes is a four-wheel vehicle with five seats and it's the same as this Skoda with four wheels and five seats, so therefore they should be priced the same, or I'll give you a
Yeah,
5%
yeah,
increase. There's sometimes three, four, even five times the price range difference between two things which are, all, into all, you know, in most ways you'd say are identical. But yet somehow that's the way we value housing is, a two-bedroom property in Blenheim Grove, which is where I've just built, is valued at the same as a two-bedroom property round the corner, even if that two-bedroom property is a totally different design and a totally different feel, and uses much lower quality materials, has lower insulation, doesn't have triple glazing, all this sort of stuff.
there is
So
there is
what does
money.
that mean for me? For me, it means that the way in which we can improve the quality of our stock and the quality of housing and to build better quality housing is to put those decisions in the hands of the customer. Because if you build them up front, then effectively, the customers may want them, but, effectively won't be able to afford them. Whereas if we allow people to make those decisions as they go along, generally they decide for themselves. Because I observed this behavior in myself, is when I was building my own home, I said, okay, I've got a choice of putting double glazed or triple glazed. I'm the one that's going to benefit directly. I will pay the extra 10 grand or whatever it was. Do I want to put, 75 mil or 100 mil of insulation? I'm going to put 100 mil, because I'm going to benefit from this. I'm going to try and make it as airtight as possible. I'm going to kind of put the solar thermal and solar PVs, and I'm going to put all of these things would directly benefit me as the occupier, and so I put all those things in. And so my sort of belief has been, you give people agency and you empower people to make decisions, and generally they will choose more environmentally friendly, better design, better quality housing that works for them. But once it works for us, or once it works for them as occupiers, it works for the sort of general society. So that's been sort of my mission ever since, really.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing about how we value things, because I don't think people really understand where the value is in a building, and if you go to 3 or 4 estate agents, they'll come back with wildly varying valuations on any property, won't they, depending on, whether it's been sunny or whether you were baking bread at the time, or
Yeah,
some perceived value. People don't really understand what goes into a building either. So I remember when we bought the show home, which was very nice, but actually we discovered later on that it had been more or less thrown together, and
yeah,
under the speed of the program, and we were on
yeah,
this new build estate which was being steadily built behind us, and we got a real eye opener into the process, because we got to know the site people, because they kept coming around to fix things, which was brilliant. They came to fix everything, but you think every day they're on site, they're losing money essentially, aren't they? They're sort of
well, that's right. So effectively, what I'm trying to do, and I have been trying to do, is to say, okay, ultimately, how can we create better quality housing? And by better quality, I mean, better for the environment, better value for the customer, better design, um, and ultimately leading to better value for the customer. It doesn't mean it's necessarily cheaper. It
No.
just means you get better value for what you pay for. If you're paying £500,000 for a home, you're getting better quality materials by doing it yourself than if you were basically buying it off the shelf because you're not paying the developer's profit and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm approaching this in two ways, and we're still, in housing, it's not like building an app. It takes a long time to go through the whole cycle. So, we've been experimenting for a number of years about the best ways, and we've tried using a menu. We've tried doing it completely bespoke. The latest project we did in Peckham, where we built shells and then let customers effectively do it themselves, in a way has been very successful because all the owners and occupiers have done amazing things with those houses. The difficulty is that the finance has been difficult, so that's been a challenge there. But I think shells is a really interesting way to build sort of homes that people can have a say in cities,
Yeah.
because effectively you don't have, if you like, the space to do detached housing in cities generally, especially not really new builds. So you can imagine a block of apartments that are all shells, or we did a terrace of housing, and this is not new elsewhere. It's just new to us.
Mm.
In many countries around the world, that's the normal way you approach it. And we're just we've got to sort of sometimes we believe that our way is the only way, and I think we've got to remember that our way is only one way, and often it's a
Yes.
sort of bit of an anomaly. In the country, we're looking more at doing plots where basically people buy a plot and then do it themselves, or we're trying to make that journey a bit easier by getting some really good architects to sort of design some choices
Yeah.
that are kind of pre-designed, costed, and then again you have the choice of just bespoking it off menu items, or you can take it at shell and just sort of do it yourself, and sort of get in there, maybe do the plumbing or the electrics yourself if you're kind of handy and you want to do it, or you've got friends that can do it. But the entire philosophy is about saying the more choice that our customers have, the better the outcomes, not only for them, but for wider society.
Yeah. So you're effectively giving more choice and more options. I mean, that sort of thing where you can buy off plan and to a certain extent specify your finishes does exist, doesn't it? Because that's what all the developers are doing to try and upsell their properties by
Yeah.
fitting stuff. But
I mean, yes, to a limited degree, it does exist. I think the sort of developers that do it, in my experience, try to keep the choice to a quite narrow selection.
yeah,
I mean, the choices we're trying to do is much more about, okay, you've got, uh, do you really want this? You've got a fixed floor plate, but do you want that fixed floor plate to be three bedrooms and one bathroom, or do you prefer two bedrooms, two bathroom, or do you want an extra study? And it's about, where do you compromise, and only you can really make those decisions. So I think they're good at, like, saying, we can change the kitchen fronts for you. You can have red, blue, or yellow.
yeah,
They're not so good at saying, if you want to kind of add in anything new, if you want to kind of completely change the layout. They're not really set up for those. Certainly not the bigger guys. Um, but yeah, I mean, look, I think what's interesting in the sector is that the government has recognised um, that this is something where are more interested in buying new builds if they get a choice. Because I'm not sure if you're aware of the survey which said that only sort of something like 76% of people would never buy a new build home. And you think, you put that into the context of cars or phones or televisions. Everyone wants a new phone or a new television or a new car. Um, and so you think there's something very fundamentally wrong where the vast majority of people would not buy a new build home.
Why is that then?
And
What's the stigma about new built properties?
well, I think, well, that's an interesting question. I have my theories. Who knows? But what I do know is that I go, and have been to a lot of housing conferences, as I'm sure you have. But when I get the chance to speak, I always ask the audience. I say, and these are audiences full of housing professionals. I say, okay, you know, how many of you, talking about housing professionals, how many of you live in a new build home, right? And it's very rarely much more than about 5% of the audience.
Yeah.
So everyone talks about new builds, but very few people actually put their sort of money where their mouth is and go and live in one. And so to me, that suggests that the product of new build is not delivering to the people that want to buy. It may be down to more difficult locations, it may be down to the product itself. I mean, you don't, for example, get that many new build houses in London. Mainly they're flats. So if you want to sort of, if you want to kind of have a house in an area that's around a good school, it's kind of hard. They're sort of few and far between. And then when developers do the new build, as you found, quite often people find that the quality is not really what they had sort of imagined it to be. So the sort of soul dream, a bit like when you buy a new car, you kind of, expect it all to work, but actually you sort of find out if it's endlessly going a bit wrong, that's really painful.
Is there a sort of romanticized view of the concept of home in the UK? I wonder, where people think that it's all about, well, I don't know. I might be just voicing my own preconceptions here, but about buying something that's traditional. It's got features. It's heritage. It's old fashioned. It's it's a step along the journey towards a country cottage. With roses around the garden gate. That sort of classic British English, residence that perhaps very few people live in these days. I wonder whether
Well,
that's
yeah, I definitely, I totally agree with that because I think that, that's how people sell the dream, isn't it? They
yeah,
sort of sell, it's there. At one point, we used to do a thing called try before you buy, where we used to let people stay in our homes, because we thought it's crazy that the sort of by far the biggest purchase you make in your life by a factor of 10, 20, or whatever, you get to sort of look around two times, three times, for half an hour each or whatever.
with
Where's the,
somebody, generally with somebody else's stuff in there as well. It's not even like you
yeah,
have to imagine what it's going to be like.
it's totally crazy. And and I don't sort of I don't understand why, as an industry, we've sort of put up with it for so long.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I don't understand, like, as I say, we are unusual. I think in terms in terms of other countries, most other countries have a much bigger sector around people building their own homes or or commissioning their own homes. I think if you look at the average across the sort of the sort of developed world, they're at kind of 45% of new homes are delivered this way. And in England and Wales, we're at sort of 7 to 8%. Um, so, and that's because most of the homes that we build, that we deliver that are new, are delivered by something like 10 companies. And,
yeah.
that 60 to 70% of new homes are delivered by these same 10 companies. And you get the same problem as you do when you've got any oligopoly, effectively. They squeeze suppliers, they squeeze quality, and they increase prices. And what's happened over the last 10, 15 years, the government has sort of been encouraging new build housing, has never really got past that sort of, there's a sort of saturation point, basically by creating incentives. And so the Help to Buy program is just crazy, because all it was doing, it was funding the profits of the major house builders. And so we have a very, very dysfunctional housing market that um, ultimately, and so much of the problems around housing is driven through this, because you're getting this problem in the rental sector, because the the government, I think, have been, and successive governments have been, afraid of not built enough homes. They want to increase home ownership, and so they're saying, well, one way to increase home ownership is take all the landlords out of the sector, and make them, effectively push them into home ownership, which is great for their stats, but it's very bad for people renting, because suddenly you've got an increasingly shorter, smaller, and shrunken market in the kind of, and so rents, unsurprisingly, are going through the roof, and so it's becoming harder and harder and harder for people to find places to rent. So, you know, all of these things are about building new homes, and generally that's done on a kind of supply and demand basis. So effectively, the major house builders sort of throttle supply in order to keep up demand for, quite frankly, a bit of a substandard product. So,
Yes.
we're in a right old mess.
There doesn't seem to be the standards or appreciation of standards, I think. There's building regs, of course, so they're kind of safe, they're not going to fall down. But in terms of added value and, materiality and, just a bit more of design led, I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
on the face of it, the estates that you see going up now, they're they're attractive, they're well laid out, they don't, it's not like rows and rows of houses. There seem to be some sense of trying to create a sense of place, but actually when you get inside, they're just sort of kind of hollow boxes, aren't they? Essentially, you feel like you could
Yeah.
knock it down by yourself. But
Yeah.
and I guess also the things like eco-friendly sort of stuff just isn't pushed. It's a bit of a sort of token add-on, and I think there could be, maybe there needs to be more sort of regulation, to drive standards up and design up.
Well, I mean, I think all of these things, it's, for me, it's always about sort of the carrot and the stick. You've
Mm.
you've got to kind of disincentivize some behavior and incentivize other behavior. So, I mean, what's absolutely crazy is that a valuer, even using basic financial um, mechanisms, should really identify the fact that if a home is highly energy efficient, that that leads to a lower energy consumption, which leads to lower bills, which over the course of a lifetime really should be added back to the value of the home.
Yeah.
But do you see that? No, you don't. You would see that in any other financial market. So, if you take that analogy of a company and said, this company, the way they're structured, whatever, they just have low bills, low cost base, you'd see that they'd have higher earnings, and then they'd have a higher valuation. But somehow that doesn't filter through to housing, because we're still saying, well, it's a two-bedroom house, a three-bedroom house, and so a three-bedroom house in this area should get this. And they're not saying, yeah, but hold on a minute, this three-bedroom house is way better. It's going to last way longer. It's less maintenance. It's better quality for the customers. They're going to live there longer. They're going to want to be there longer. So, but none of that gets factored in.
All of that's about, better sustainability in terms of not just the products and materials, but also,
Yeah.
culturally and socially more
I,
sustainable, isn't it?
I mean, in fact, you are beginning to see this happening in the commercial market, having said that about the residential market. So it's possible then, in a matter of however many years, that you will see houses that are very energy inefficient being priced more, the value being lower.
Yeah.
And in a way, for me, I think, talking of incentives, one of the things I've often said, I mean, we're slightly getting off the subject of self-build, but, we're in the, one of the things that I've always thought is stamp duty is a very crude tax, mechanism. And really, you could use stamp duty to encourage environmental kind of performance. So very easily, you say the stamp duty goes to zero if it's an A-rated
Mhm.
EPC, and it's very high if it's a G-rated
Yeah.
EPC. And that would encourage people with a home to sell that's a G, knowing that the purchaser is going to have to pay a big tax bill. They say, okay, well, I might as well invest that in the home to try
Yes.
and move
Yeah.
it up the stamp duty
Yeah.
scale.
Well, that would be, yeah, that would correlate, wouldn't it, in terms of
Yeah, and it'd be a very
investment.
simple thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So just going back to the process, well, I mean, I think what you've got there with your offer is something that differentiates yourself from the rest of the market, because
Yeah.
you're offering quality, you're offering choice. How do you market that, and who are you marketing it to? Because there must be people out there who are prime sort of target market. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea.
Yeah, it's actually quite hard to the marketing is harder than you'd imagine, because especially trying to market shells, because if you go on to Rightmove, there's no category for shells. You
Right.
can't say, let's look at this shell.
Yeah.
So so you basically, if people don't read the description that that closely, and very few people do, they say, oh, this house is on the market for 500,000, not realizing that then they have to fit it out themselves. So and so you get a lot of people that go, oh, well, then that's not for me. So you get a lot of
Yeah.
people not quite realizing. Yet if you put it on with the fit out, then it kind of looks expensive, and then people say, what do you mean I can't just move in straight away? So the marketing's actually quite
Yeah.
difficult to do something like that. Zoopla does allow plots of land. I think the plots of land's a bit simpler. But yeah, I mean, the marketing is very much, we're in that kind of early adopter
Yeah.
phase, I would
You're
say.
going to need
A bit
people that,
a bit like, we're trying to sort of launch to the sort of die-hard people that love grand designs and want to do it
yes, yeah,
themselves a bit.
people that understand design and also
People,
are
yeah.
prepared to put a bit of effort into the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only necessarily just understand design, but appreciate design, and recognizing that actually that what they want they cannot get.
Yeah.
So most people's solution to that is to buy a kind of wreck of a home, a period property that's a wreck, rip everything out that's there
Yeah.
and start again. But that will only take you so far, because you're still left with effectively an environmentally not particularly friendly home unless you really invest a lot. Very difficult to get insulation into period property. You can sash windows and not by and of themselves particularly airtight. And so you've got this problem with people doing that, and also they're ripping stuff out that might be perfectly good. Not, they might be dated, it might be a bit out of fashion, but not, it's not that it's not functional. And so you end up with quite a lot of waste that way. And then you also, people getting in to a period property or whatever, and finding that there's kind of rot underneath the floorboards, and and walls that need coming down, and then it ends up being a bigger and bigger job that
Yeah.
they weren't expecting. So the idea of doing new builds, where I thought the idea of doing shells as new builds was a good one, because it really allowed people to take something on which was all new and functional, and gave them a complete blank canvas to sort of do whatever they wanted with. Um, so that part of it's all been very good. I think that the most difficult thing is really about finding the customers, and the customers getting the finance. That's
Yeah.
the sort of challenges that I'm kind of having to overcome.
So once you've got that customer engaged, what's the process and timescale of them from, I guess, the first meeting to discuss what they want to when they might move in?
Yeah, I think it sort of depends. I mean, I think we've had a range of people do this, all taking it in slightly different ways. So, on one extreme, you've got people that bought the shell, moved in very quickly into a shell, and kind of effectively built the home around themselves, pretty much living on a building site for, 6 months to a year or whatever. Then you've got other people who bought the shell, got builders to sort of get it up to a livable standard, but not finished, not completely finished. It kept things quite raw, um, and then moved in, and then they'll sort of do the rest over time. Then you've got people who do go the whole hog and get the architects and the whole design team to do the whole proper fit out, send builders in to do it, and do it like that. So you have got a kind of quite a spectrum of different occupiers with their sort of different needs, doing it in different ways.
I suppose that opens up more potential for different types of customers, doesn't it? Does that how do you manage that then? Is there an issue around having lots of different people working on different properties within a development, or?
It seemed to be okay because I think because we've done the sort of heavy lifting in a way on the shell and everything was built, and so in a sense, the builders could go into the front door and close the door behind them, make us, they obviously it'd be noisy, but it's not, as you would imagine, but they're sort of fitting out, which is not as messy as, it's not like groundworks, it's not like superstructures, all of those things were done. So in a sense, that's been not too bad. Yeah, I was slightly nervous about that. And this next project we're doing is plots, and that might be a little bit more complicated because you've got the sort of messiness of the foundations and the superstructure and things of lorries moving around, stuff like that. Um, but these other things been, yeah, it's been okay actually, from a logistics perspective. It's a bit like, someone doing a kind of period property refurb. It's a bit messy, a bit annoying for
Yeah,
the neighbours, but
yeah, yeah,
it sort of skips outside the door, but they kind of
yeah,
come and go.
yeah.
But
Well, welcome to my world. That's what I've been doing for the last 8 months or so with
right, yeah, exactly.
the skip. We got the skip at the end of the drive, slightly blocking, access.
It
Was the
becomes
talk of the village, I must say. We got a bright yellow one as well. It wasn't even camouflaged. It was, well, they knew we were here. But
it becomes a sculpture.
that's well, yes, we made our mark from the get go with that. But yeah, it's not an easy process, is it? Building, particularly if you're in the building. But what kind of support are you able to give? How hands-on are you with helping
Well,
clients?
it's funny because I offered everyone the opportunity to sort of, engage with us. So I offered everyone the opportunity to say, do you want us to do it for you?
Yeah.
Um, do you want us to sort of project manage for you? Do you want us to be kind of on the end of the phone? I mean, all different sort of factors of kind of service, or do you just want to get on with it themselves? And everyone chose to just get on with it themselves.
Right.
I get the odd email or the odd phone call, but I mean, very, very rarely.
That's interesting. So you've obviously got a client base that are fairly confident to do this kind of work then.
Yes, I do think they have to be confident. So there was one first time buyer, and he was the one that sort of lived on site. And I think he learned the lesson. He probably wouldn't do that again.
Yes.
Everyone else had sort of, had some experience of, either living somewhere, or maybe doing a bit of refurb and seeing this as a bigger project, but not completely insurmountable.
Yes. Yeah. I noticed on your website you've got different options, I guess, the warm, basic and finished, so
Yeah,
you can basically work with the customer to decide which route they're going
yeah,
to take.
that's right. But everyone chose the basic shell.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, that's That's great. I mean, that's the blank canvas. You want to, if you're creative in any way, that's an opportunity, isn't it, to really shape
It
the way
is,
that you live.
and do you know what's sort of been so pleasing for me as a sort of experiment, because this is basically an experiment, I'm trying something, completely new. So I don't think new build shells have ever been built before in this way. You've got commercial shells, and you've got lots of people that have, that they took an old building and kind of converted them into shells. But I don't think anyone's done a kind of ground up new build shell. What's really interesting to me is that the layouts are so completely different. So when I started doing this in terms of the marketing, going back to the marketing strategy, I sat down with the architect and we sort of designed two different floor layouts for every floor. And these are split levels, so they're like five floors in each, five sort of half floors. And so, if you kind of work out the configuration, there are loads and loads of different configurations. I really should do the mathematical sum on that. I think it's probably something like, 100 different combinations or 150 different combinations. Um, and not a single person used any. They all just did something completely their own thing, and that in a way was like, oh well, all that time we spent trying to figure out all the different combinations was wasted. But actually it made me think, you know what, in a way that's great, because I think arguably it's letting people, give people an opportunity to be creative in a way that you can't so much with Victorian homes, because generally there's only a few moves you can do in
Yes. Well,
if you're taking a Victorian terrace home, there's extension at the back, there's the side return, there's the
yeah,
loft conversion.
yeah,
There's only a few ways you can configure that front ground space. Do you take the wall away? Do you add a kind of, little an outside bit between the kitchen extension and the front bit, depending on the length. So, and as you know, you as a designer, you'd know.
yes.
So, whereas here, it's really radically different.
That must be really exciting. I mean, when you think about all those terraced houses, I mean, the only difference is whether they're left-handed or right-handed, but they're
Exactly.
across the whole country. Everyone's lived in them. Everyone knows the layout. If you were
Yeah.
dropped in someone's house anywhere, you'd be able to find the kitchen, wouldn't you, or the
Yeah.
toilet?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
but
Exactly.
but that having that variety sounds fascinating. And this is early days, so have any of these properties then been sold on? I mean, or
Not yet.
not
No.
yet? So
No, they haven't. No, I mean, other homes that we've built have been sold on. Those were done in a slightly different way. Those ones we did where we did it bespoke to the occupier. So,
mm,
we would sit down with you and you would say, right, I want this there and that there and there. And then we would do it all. But we were it was much more controlled, and it was a very painful process. So I didn't want to do that again. Um, because it took so much time, and it's so difficult for the contractor actually,
yeah.
because if the contractor is trying to deliver a completely different project, it's really tough to keep track of like which tile should be going in which home and on what floor.
Yeah, I mean, you can see why, a certain amount of standardization is useful in that industry. But
Yeah, absolutely.
what would be interesting, I guess, is to see how these properties, when they come to market, how they're received by potential buyers, because that will
Yeah.
be the telling point, won't it, of whether people can recognize the value or, I mean,
Well, I
certainly,
mean, the only thing that we ended up retaining a couple which we rented out, and we got, I mean, it's difficult to say because it's a very strong rental market, but we did get a very, good, a real premium on other rental properties in the area, and we got a lot of people who wanted to move into them. I mean, I don't know if that tells you anything. It's a very small data set, but yeah, no, I think I mean, so far all the signs are good. And to be honest, also to be completely frank, we sort of we lucked out because we sort of bought into Peckham, which has also become a much cooler place since sort of time we bought the site, time we sort of, these guys moved in. And
yeah, there's that. I mean, that's the other factor, isn't it? Of as they say, location. It's and timing in the market, which can
yeah.
skew all the other metrics, can't it? I guess. But you're talking going back to sustainability. To what extent have you been able to put in those sustainable elements to the designs?
Well, in the shells, what we did is we said, okay, we're just going to put the basic. We're going to make this as airtight, as highly insulated, and as possible, because that's sort of within our control. And then we're going to leave it to the customers to decide whether they want the solar PVs and all that stuff. Because because we weren't putting any electrics in, it sort of didn't make any sense to put the solar panels in. So they're all triple glazed and highly insulated and very airtight. And when we first talked to some contractors and we said, look, we want to build a shell, we want an airtightness of 3, they also looked at us and said, absolutely not, John. You'll never get that with a shell, because contractors are used to getting airtightness by sort of layering upon layer of mastic and
Yeah,
crap, on the inside. Everything we've done has been complicated. It's why the project's taken a very long time. Because, A, we wanted to do shells, B, we wanted to do airtight shells, C, we wanted to do this sort of split level. All of those things meant that, and I think in retrospect, we should probably chosen one thing to do to start with,
yeah.
and rather than sort of launch all of those complicated things all at once. But together they have made a really great project, but it's been, annoyingly, it's taken much longer than I wanted it to.
You're breaking the kind of protocols of building there, now, aren't you? In terms of
I
what?
am, because as one of the things you mentioned earlier in the call, you're talking about time, because time is so important to developers, because they're paying for very expensive funding. And but time is not in the best interest of quality, as you know, in the kind of time, quality, cost triangle. You if quality is important, time and cost slightly have to give. You either have to spend a whole load of money, which you can't, because it's a commercial project and you've got funding, or you have to take your time about it. So that's one of the things that in theory, for the next one, I'm hoping that the if I make it simpler, now I know some of the things, I will sort of know a bit more what to do. It should go a bit more quickly, but we shall see. We shall
Yeah,
see.
yeah. I think time is a very interesting element there, because I think it takes time to understand how to, in a house you're unfamiliar with, how to live in a house, or where you want to be. That's what we've found in our new property, where we have the sunlight coming in different times of the day, different windows, and you're thinking, well, actually it works quite well. But if I had an empty shell, I'd be thinking, right, where do I want to be sitting in the late afternoon? Where's the sun going to be? And it might take a bit of time for me to work that out. Whereas if you just do it off plan, you probably haven't even worked out where the sun is on a
No,
you
no, I
and
agree.
yeah, you end up not really getting the most out of the building.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, it's interesting. We did sell these off plan, and we got lots of people interested. But for whatever reason, mainly due to sort of delays with various complications in the building industry, a lot of the early people, most of them fell away actually. And it was only once we'd actually started to build them, and you could stand in the space and go,
Yeah,
right, where is the sun coming, and how does this feel, and can I imagine myself eating breakfast in this room, or is this a bedroom?
yeah.
That's when they really all sold.
I think that's the thing about buying or renting is you have to go in, don't you? You have to walk through the door, imagine it's your home, and see whether it
Yeah,
makes you feel good.
yeah, that's it. And in a way, that's the good and the bad about the shells, because not everyone has that sense of imagination. Lots of people want to kind of see the show home and sort of fall in love with the show home. So Yeah, I mean, I wonder next time whether we might do one show home and then let people see the show home and then go into the shell and say, okay, well, I'll sort of change it this way or that way or whatever.
Yeah, you'd end up. Yeah, I think you'd end up selling lots of the show home, and people wouldn't
Yeah,
necessarily.
you probably would. It probably wouldn't be quite as an interesting creative
Yeah, is
outing.
that is that what excites you about it? The fact that these could be all different.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what excites me about it is that effectively, if I want people to build their own home, and you know, we actually by doing shells, because one of the big question marks I had for myself is fitting out a shell enough to call it sort of to give people the sort of agency and empowerment that I want to sort of set out to do. And I've proved to myself that yes, it very much is because the way that these things can be so different, it really suits everyone's lifestyle, or they've made those decisions and those sort of choices for themselves. And they've gone on their own journey. And and I think all of those things are incredibly valuable. And and the guy that the first time buyer that did his house sort of bit by bit has also learned a huge amount about building in a sense that now it's not so scary because you've been in the building industry long enough to know that building isn't scary because each bit you sort of layer on and it's sort of it's all none of it's rocket science.
Yeah.
It's all very straightforward. But somehow, unless you sort of dig under the surface, you don't realize that, and it can all be very scary. So, sort of seeing how your house goes together is a very, I think, is a powerful lesson for people.
I think it's yeah, I've always thought about that, particularly when you get builders who build a kind of mystique around the process.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's just basically, four walls, ceiling and a floor. And then the tricky thing is knowing the order to do things,
well,
first
that's right. Yeah,
next. But yeah, it's just basic materials, isn't it, essentially, which is quite
there's
nice.
not
And
much to it. There really
oh
isn't much to it. And even, I mean, I mean, the internal walls, when you sort of see how an internal wall is built, if you're sort of using stud work, it's like, literally you're doing something to hold up a bit of plasterboard with either a bit of timber or a bit of metal.
yeah.
And then, connecting the light switches with some wire and, connecting the toilets with some drain pipes and some water.
Yes, I think we don't want to belittle the building trade here by suggesting it's all very simple, but I think there is a kind of lack of knowledge about how things go together that would be
Yeah, and I think that the difficulty in the building trade is actually more in the design element of it. And so it's easy to build all the things we're talking about. It's very easy also to get it wrong from a design perspective and make it look like a total dog's dinner.
yeah,
So so in a funny kind of way, the creating the sort of minimalist or less is more look is much, much harder than the more is more.
yeah, yeah,
Trying to make sure that you've got a matching palette of tones, colors, materiality is very hard because that requires people to think outside box. It's also leave it to a builder, and often they will put a socket in the middle of the wall where it they've not thought about where it needs to go, and that it needs to go either side of the bed rather than right in the middle behind the bed, those sort of things. And so it's sort of trying, one of the things I was keen to do is try to avoid too much plastic in these houses as well. So because we all, I think the building industry puts a lot of plastic in houses, and that I don't think that's so good.
well, the masticing and
Yeah,
silicon decorators caulk, it's like
yeah,
one wonders what you know, I mean, they're very great, useful products, but
very useful
I don't
products.
know
Yeah.
how sustainable it is. Or you just basically, like you say, you're putting plastic into the building to just make up for the like, marginal small errors of how things go together. But
Yeah, exactly.
it,
Exactly.
when you're talking about just going back to sustainability with the customers, how do you broach the topic of sustainability? I mean, I had a meeting yesterday where we were talking about how do you promotes sustainability to your customers, and what are the challenges? Everyone has, I guess, the idea that sustainability is good, but it's not something that everyone wants to adopt. Do you have discussions with the customers, or what's your attitude to trying to
I
promote
think I mean, so to be honest, I don't, I've never hard sold it. I've always been a bit of a soft sell on that because I don't want to come across as a kind of eco evangelist. Um, I've always sort of said, look, we're going to do the best we can do. You're either going to kind of buy into that philosophy and do the best you can do, or not. But if you don't do anything else, at least there's a sort of baseline. And and then let people sort of decide for themselves, really. I mean, you give them the option, but I think it's very hard to make people do things against their will. So I think in a sense, yeah, I think it's about optionality rather than coercion, as it were.
Yeah. So it's a gently lead, or
I think so, because I think you want them to feel that I've always thought you want customers to make that choice for themselves, really.
yeah,
And it's always about, like, well, think about the ongoing maintenance, the energy bills, da da da. So you're trying to make them think about it. In a sense, most green stuff is good for the wallet. Okay, there may be a capital expenditure, but over the long haul, if you're going to be in your home for a long period of time, it's probably going to pay off. I think we obviously saw a massive spike in energy bills. They'll come down, but they probably won't come down to what we were used to.
yeah.
We've sort of reset the bar in a way, and so the silver lining to that cloud is that people are a bit more conscious about it.
People are going to be thinking more about that, aren't they? When they're trying to sell.
Yeah, I think so, and I think what's one of the revolutions is in solar PV. So when I put solar PVs on my home, there was a big government subsidy
Mm.
uh, because they were so expensive, but now they're so cheap, there's no need to be a subsidy because actually they sort of pay for themselves, and so it sort of becomes a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think that's the way of, the more adoption of that, the more
Yeah.
accessible it becomes. So what's next on your sort of journey with this sort of.
Well, I've got two things on my journey. The first is we've got these plots that we're selling out in Essex, which is going to be 12 houses that you can buy either as a plot or go through by a shell or sort of customize your thing. And then I'm also sort of I'm writing a book, or I've written a book which is all about sort of how to be an architect developer. So anyone who's a designer that wants to get into development, hopefully they can get into that as well. So and then uh, those are the sort of two main sort of areas of focus, and then really it's about thinking about the next project and where the next project turns up, and I want to move along with my Essex project a bit more and kind of get customers coming through and selling some plots and stuff. And then for me, it's a decision whether I stay focused in cities and do shells, or go move into outside cities and do plots. You can't really do plots in cities, I don't think.
I suppose it's about refining what you've. I mean, interesting. You're right. You've written a book, which must be everything you've learned in the past few years, distilled into.
Well, yes. I mean, it's more. I mean, the book I've written is much more about being, if you like, a design-led developer.
Yeah,
I've worked with a lot of architects over the years, and a lot of them have asked me, oh, they want to get into development. It always looks easy, and a lot of developers, earn more money than architects. So I think
yes,
architects go around, and I
yeah,
think architects could be really could be really good at doing it. So yes, it's been useful. So I can take all the mistakes I've made and say these are some of the things you need to avoid doing.
That sounds great. I think that would be a good read. When you're designing for people, they're the recipients of the benefit, aren't they, of the value of your design. And
Yeah,
I think that goes through every designer, architect's head, is we should be doing this,
yeah.
It's definitely a different set of skills, but if you've got good design on a project, that must make it more successful, I would suggest.
I think so. And I mean, I think there have been various kind of attempts at sort of research. I don't know how robust the research has been, but certainly, that some research was sort of talking about that there's a sort of design premium. A lot of architects that have done the sort of developments finish their developments and they sell very well because they're very attractive homes that generally is hard to find because most developers don't spend a lot on design or architecture. They might spend some money on a nice tap, but they won't necessarily put it, they won't put it into the kind of the layout or the lines or the feel or the all of that other stuff that's important in design.
Yeah, but I suppose even with an architect design house, you're not getting that user engagement, and I think that's
No,
the
you're not. You're
thing
not.
you're
And
doing.
I think that's that's my particular thing. But and I started off with the sort of design. I started off doing architect led, fully finished homes. Yeah, and it clearly there is a gap in the market for that because they didn't, people really like those homes. I get bored easily, so I wanted to sort of go to the next challenge, which ended up being a big challenge.
What's the feedback from the customers so far? How do they feel in their new homes that they've helped design?
Generally, I think everyone really likes it. I think it's the feedback probably comes later down the line, really, once you sort of the honeymoon period is sort of, you know, um
Once they've recovered
moved
from the
on.
stress of it all, you think?
Yeah, exactly. Because it is stressful. I mean, building is very stressful.
Yeah.
It's, there's a lot of people involved and there's a lot of money involved. And until you've been in a building project, you don't know what it's like to endlessly write out checks for thousands of pounds every week. You might go, oh, this is expensive, a couple of £100. And you're like, that's nothing in the building, it's like
Yeah.
you get used to seeing your bank account drain, like, in a matter of weeks or months.
But the benefits at the end
But the
outweigh.
benefit at the end is huge. And and my experience is always you go through that difficult time and then the bank balance jumps up again and then it slowly comes and jumps up again. And that's the life of a developer in a way. You pay, then you sell and it goes back up, then everything's rosy. Then you pay, and I think even if you're just doing your own home, it's the same thing. You set out with a budget of, you know, £100,000 to do up your thing, and that feels a bit abstract. But when you might have £100,000 in the bank that you've saved for many years to get, and then bit by bit as you're spending £10,000 a week and it's dropping to 90, 80, 70, 60, it starts to, it starts to become a bit scary. But hopefully you get there before it goes negative, and and then you build it up again. But in the meantime, you've got an amazing home to live in. That's one of the advantages of, I suppose, buying a shell versus buying a Victorian home, is that we discounted the shell to take account of the fact that you need to fit it out. But some Victorian homes that need total gutting and remodernising aren't discounted very much.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. You end up having to do all that work, having paid. I mean, particularly when you see a house that's just been fitted out by its owners who are just trying to sell it, and you're thinking, well, that's great, but I don't like that kitchen.
Well, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not,
So
and so the way that developers get around that is they put in for sort of, the lowest common denominator. So
yeah,
everything is very neutral.
yeah,
That you might not want neutral. You might, it's basically like saying, do you want the sort of vanilla ice cream or do you like, you know, lavender and sea salt or whatever, and if you particularly like the idea of a slightly adventurous flavor, you can't buy that off the shelf. You have to do that yourself.
I'd like to thank Gus for taking the time to speak to me. It's really exciting to hear his approach to new build and how he's trying to reinvent the process to introduce more choice and more customization and raise the quality of the product. It's early days and it'd be interesting to see how these things develop over time, but it sounds from the feedback that he's been getting from his clients that it's a very positive experience and empowers the owners in the process of developing their own home and ending up with a better product at the end of it. It's a user-focused approach, which is an important aspect of the interior design work we are doing, both in our company Multi-Story Thinking and also when I teach down at the University of Plymouth. If you'd like to become a kick-ass interior designer, follow the links in the show notes to the interior design course at the University of Plymouth. I'd like to thank Dave Clark from I Am The How for production support and invaluable advice in the setting up of this podcast, Kay Hansen for her planning support and co-hosting for these and our educational podcasts for the University of Plymouth, and Mark Frith for the music. I'd like to thank Karen Lerner for putting me in touch with Gus in the first place. Thanks for that introduction. I'd like to get your feedback, leave a comment or get in touch via the website or Instagram. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Thank you.